I had a patient who broke into our pharmacy asking for his semaglutide order because he was so hungry and he didn't want to be off of the medication.
Wow.
He was like almost called him a hunger zombie. So they were so reliant on this medication. They were so hungry once they missed their dose that they were trying to break into the pharmacy to get this medication.
A new wave of zombies, man.
The lowering of markers for hypertension. I remember when 120/80 was normal.
Yep.
And now they're saying, no, it's got to be 110/70. And I understood why they did that. Because if a patient had 120/80, which we thought was perfect,
normal, yeah.
now they can give a antihypertensive med to that.
What? Yeah.
Think about that. 110 is
lowering.
or 70 is normal. So anything over that is okay to use it as an antihypertensive. So they just were able to capture the rest of the healthy market to give because they were lowering.
And that just happened.
No, that was a long time ago. Yes, I remember. That was in Cairo school. I remember that.
Really?
Welcome to the Functional Code, your go-to source for decoding optimal health. Join Dr. Addy and Dr. Jace as they break down the science behind pain, performance, longevity, and more, making complex concepts easy for you to understand and apply in your life. Your journey to a healthier you begins with understanding the Functional Code.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Functional Code, episode 32. Today, we are talking all about GLP-1s, Ozempic, semaglutide, terzepatide, everything that you've been hearing in the news regarding the new weight loss medication that has been sweeping the nation. We're going to be talking about that. We're also going to be talking about ways that you can properly use these kinds of compounds, medications, and understanding what is best when using these kinds of compounds. So, as always, today I am Dr. Addy.
I am Dr. Jace. This is going to be so exciting. So those of you that have tuned on with us for the last few ones on peptides, regenerative medicine, this is definitely a little bit of the holy grail for most people that are trying to find answers for this weight loss situation, even for these other conditions that Doc just brought up. We're going to dive into some of the statistics and what is going on in the healthcare with obesity and how is that being managed with diabetes and all these other conditions. Then we're going to dive into GLPs and the interventions that have been utilized for some of this. And then adding on to what are the common medications being used and what are some of the upcoming ones that you may find more beneficial for you and your body to get the results that you need, but even more importantly, how to utilize these GLPs with other means of intervention for a better long-term use.
Absolutely.
That'll be a huge one for most people.
Yes.
And then a lot of the newer upcoming stuff and trials down the road with some of this research in these areas. As we dive into more specifics here, please follow, leave comments below. We're here to ask any and answer any questions that you may have on any of these topics. There's a wealth of knowledge that we want to help bring you on a continual and weekly basis. Doc, this is going to be exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited.
I know you've been prepared for this for months.
For sure.
We're just going to unleash the beast, if we will, on this one. Where U.S. and just even the nation is at right now with obesity, diabetes, there's a huge epidemic coming.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been in this for a while, and I think it's been in the forefront of the whole news and economy.
Yeah.
Where are we at? Let's start broad and then we can dive into more narrow. Obesity in 2050, where are some of the upcoming statistics look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we're looking at the future of the health of the United States, and we talk about weight loss and we talk about reasons why patients would want to lose weight and who should be losing weight, you're going to start to look at these trends. And unfortunately, the trend is not looking good for the United States. We are as unhealthy as we've ever been. We are, unfortunately, as obese as we've ever been, and it's only going to get worse, according to the studies being done and projections done. And these are being done by the CDC and governmental agencies that are probably have access to an incredible amount of information and data on patients. And so they are able to predict this. And it's scary. It's really scary when you take a look at this because already, right now, the current weight stats that they have, according to CDC on the United States, is around 70% of the United States adults are either overweight or obese. So we are already halfway over the mark on our adults in the United States that are overweight or obese. 42% are classified as obese and 30% are classified as overweight, which equals right around 72%. So that's without even getting to 2050 yet. What could that look like getting to 2050? We're predicting that 1 in 2 individuals will be obese by 2050, not overweight. When you look at the spectrum, the obese marker would be the far marker according to body mass index. But when it comes to just the conglomeration of obesity and overweight, it might even get up to 80, if not 85% by 2050.
That's unreal.
And now you're looking at our health status together with just all the other comorbidities that we're going to be having with that, cardiovascular issues, hypertension. We're going to be talking about other types of chronic conditions that come with that. Diabetes, we're going to jump into in a little bit here. But when we pair all of those together, what we're going to be seeing is a need for further health management, which comes only with more medications and more need for good providers to manage these patients. But I'm only predicting we're going to come to a point where we just aren't going to be able to manage all these sick individuals. There's no way.
Definitely not. And even growing up too, like going through elementary, middle school, high school, like we knew that this was a thing, and it's been on the radar for the whole U.S. economy for years, and it's still, the trend's going upward. So whoever is most educated right now will have the better benefit for them and their family.
And you take a look at the United States, when you took the entire world's population, we are a smaller percentage of that. And we consume 85% of pharmaceutical drugs as a nation out of the entire world.
Quick fix.
So it's a culture mindset. We unfortunately are being governed by pharmaceutical companies. I think we're being misled. They control a lot of the media. If you watched the Olympics recently, I don't know if you any of you were watching the Olympics, but if you were, that was the only commercials being shown during that time was pharma commercials. So we need to wake up and we need to realize that there is a huge misleading mindset being done on U.S. Americans right now. And it's unfortunately only going to be fixed until we change this mindset that you got to take care of yourself. You got to be your own advocate, and you got to quit relying on modern medicine to take care of the poor health and choices that you're gonna make in your life. There just isn't going to be another way.
Well stated.
And yes, GLPs have done a great job at helping patients lose weight that they maybe have never been able to, but there is a underlying, I guess we'll call it, concern before we really can rely on a medication like this to take care of the weight loss and diabetic issue. And obviously we'll get more into that, but.
And even going on that, a lot of it is going back to dopamine receptors that are the pursuit towards something that we find joyful, benefit for us. And that will come from food companies. That will come from a whole bunch of other resources, if we will. So it's stemming from they're targeting our reward system, our neurological reward system, which is hardwired into us. And if we're not mentally aware of that, which most people aren't, it's a battle that we're losing as the decades go on.
For sure.
Just understanding that and having the upfront knowledge that a lot of these are going back to circuits in your brain that you can rewire, cause neuroplasticity, to learn and understand and to move forward for the betterment.
Yeah. And so looking at 2050 again, as this trend is being measured, it's estimated that over 30% of children and adolescents worldwide could be overweight or obese by 2050. And why that's important to realize is because studies are showing that if you have a child and they are obese and they remain obese through childhood, there is a very large chance they're going to be obese in their adulthood. And that's scary because we are having more and more patients being put on statins, hypertensive meds, anti-anxiety meds by the time they're 18. I knew a young friend of mine, I think he was 24 on a statin, cholesterol med. And I was blown away. I couldn't believe that someone could let their health get to that point so young and B, that a doctor would prescribe that medication to a
Exactly.
24-year-old.
Yeah.
I remember growing up when I was in college, hearing I had friends who were in their 20s that were on anti-anxiety medication. I was blown away, and I was like, I didn't realize that we needed that. I just had no idea that the age were being affected so early. And it scared me because I almost felt angry because these were people that I loved. And I just wish I could have influenced them in some way to say, I'm your age and I'm just as stressed. I was going through stuff in my early 20s. I was getting over an addiction, but I had gotten over that, and I had been working out, and I'd taken care of myself to a point where I felt miles ahead of where I was at. And I haven't been on medications in my entire life, even when I was going through hard times. And I guess the problem that I had was I knew that there was way better ways to manage it without medication, and the fact that we're so early on giving up and just needing that as a crutch, it really bothers me.
100%.
And so when you take a look at just early childhood, late childhood stats, they're showing that ages 2 to 5, if there is obesity, there's a 25% chance of remaining obese in adulthood. If the risks increase in obesity persist into late childhood or adolescence, there's a 70 to 80% chance of children aged 10 to 14 becoming obese in adulthood. And ages 15 to 17, that rises to about 80 to 90%. So we're getting to that point where you're running out of time because you're more than likely developing these behaviors as they get older, and that won't be changing the older that they get.
And there's examples, documented examples of people who have obese families that if the kids, if they know the knowledge that they can change the trajectory, let's say in their late teens, early 20s, like Andy Galpin is a really good example. He is more of a researcher in the human performance area, if we
Yeah,
will.
yeah.
He was talking about in the past podcast that his family are more on the obese side. At least they were at that time, and he had to work uphill battle because he has supposedly genetics that are wired towards that demographic, if we will. And he switched things around. He's one of the world's leading experts in like human performance and all aspects of physiology of the body, but a lot of it came down to understanding knowledge. And that's just one example. There's many others around there. So it's possible to understand, know it, and then switch it, even if your family is surrounding environment
For sure.
or is not suitable.
For
So,
sure. Yeah. And I love Galpin. I think he's phenomenal. And I really enjoy, that's another podcast if anybody wants to
Yeah.
get into. He's a wealth of knowledge.
Yes.
But the crazy stat that I'm just want to leave everybody with that I have been hearing more and more is by 2050, 1 in 2 will be obese, 1 in 3 will have diabetes, and of those patients that have diabetes, 1 in 3 will get Alzheimer's from it.
Yeah. And if you guys have family members or know someone who has Alzheimer's, it's so tough psychological and mental wise on a whole family members, especially if you start losing memory of who you are, like if you're that person, and it can be very frustrating. I
It
know we
is.
have patients on the same path, and it's not easy. Once you get to that point,
And it's very
It's tough.
scary for the patient who wants to stay cognizant and isn't really aware of what's going on, and they get frustrated because they more than likely understand until the disease itself takes full reign over. But leading up to it, they are getting frustrated from the memory loss. They are get frustrating that the repeat questions, and yeah, it's a terrible disease. And any chance that we have to limit these kinds of things from happening, or at least understand how to prevent these things if possible, or decrease the risk, is going to be really important moving forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, Doc. Now let's look at GLPs. Like, just first off, what are GLP-1s and how were obesity and diabetes managed even before patients started using GLPs?
Yeah. So you would almost always hope that diet and lifestyle would be prescribed by providers as usually a first line for managing weight. And not that it isn't, but the recent statistics that we have on the prescription of diet and lifestyle is actually comical, because what they're finding is about 1 in 5 patients adhere to long-term dietary changes, depending on the condition that they have. And about 1 in 5 patients maintain regular physical activity over time when prescribed. And I even find that stat hard to believe. I don't know. What do you think? Do you really think that 20% of patients are adhering to diet and lifestyle prescription?
I feel like it's probably,
Yeah,
but
okay.
I think the real kicker is that it's happening to so many people that it's becoming such a norm that physicians or who's ever talking to people, education system, about just the management of weight loss and just even diabetes itself, though, where it doesn't have an emotional response. Oh, everyone's doing it. I'll eventually get it. It is what it is. In order to create a change for someone to adhere to anything long term, there almost has to be an emotional reaction, or you have to have an environment surrounding to support that factor.
For sure.
And if everyone more or less is not on the same page, if they're not understanding the implications of what could come down the road, I think obviously they're going to push it off, kick the can down
There's
the
no
road.
internal drive.
And and then it doesn't create change long term. Yeah, especially if their family has this already ingrained into them and their habits. Like, you're asking a young kid, a teenager, a 20-year-old to create change and go against their family when that's a huge support system for them. There's a lot of underlying things that's obviously.
You'd almost hope the family together would take
Yes.
that burden on as a goal.
Solid.
And that's almost not the only way, but such an easier way to take that obstacle and jump over that as a hurdle.
Yeah.
But not to say that you as a young 15, 20-year-old couldn't go upstream against what your typical environment is. Just a lot harder when you don't have your support system, and maybe you need to find a new support system, which is scary by itself too.
Yes, and I know you can speak on that, and I think that's a solid point. I think everyone needs to recognize that if a family member that you have that you care about is going through this, you as a family need to rally.
For sure.
Like, it's, and I would say almost any condition, borderline if it has anything to do with the long-term status of someone's health.
Yeah.
The family.
Yeah.
Pack mentality, man.
So other than diet and lifestyle, medications, insulin, all have been used to manage both weight and diabetes. But usually it ends up getting to a point where if it's so severe, they use bariatric surgery as the kind of final intervention to really change behavior, for lack thereof, of trying. And patients then drop a large amount of weight. And then success rates of bariatric surgery are quite high, but success is a tough word to use when you are creating such drastic change to the body. And
are they looking at short term or long term?
Both. It is. In the short term and in the long term, it is incredibly effective on weight loss.
Yes.
Now, successful it's a subjective term, in my opinion, because you now limit your ability to intake a certain amount of food. Your malabsorption rates are much higher. Your quality of life, yes, the amount of weight you lose probably gives you way more ability to do more things and feel better. You're going to probably have a lower chance of cardiovascular incidents. So yes, that subjective quality of life improves, but the quality of life then of the ability not to take in nutrients, eat how you should be eating, it's still up for debate on that type of. So yes, it's easy for providers to just hone in on that subjective, but when you take a look at the whole body, you're missing the mark there. But yes, short and long term, that's going to be the final point where you're going to probably improve. I think research shows it adds about 6 to 14 years to your life when you have bariatric surgery from a long standing obesity. You're going to lower your chance of a heart attack, and you're going to be able to then maybe work out and move more if you're not 300 pounds instead 200 pounds. So yes, all good things coming from a procedure like that. It's just now you set yourself up for other things and issues down the road. But where's the pros, cons? And that's going to be obviously up to yourself to make that decision.
Absolutely. And Doc, I love that you brought that up, the success portion of what is success. And obviously when they look at success, it's more times right after the surgery, or right after the weight has been dispersed out. But what are those conversations looking like from the physicians to re-ingrain the habits, re-ingrain the environment, the setting, to actually keep long-term? Like when we look at success, we're focusing, us as a unit are focusing as the long-term stent.
Right.
And that's where, yes, it may look and be successful momentarily, but like that's where some of these GLP-1s can help for a split second, but then how are they managed as time goes on?
Exactly.
And we're going to get into that here. Doc's going to do an awesome job. Doc, let's say with diabetes itself, we know that insulin's a huge driving factor. A lot of that will come from the pancreas and its reaction to downregulate the blood sugar. Let's dive into that pathway and like where it actually stems from and starts, and what most people understand and know. And then we can disperse out for some of the other pharmacological interventions or other things that are being done.
Yeah. And in terms of diabetes, you have two types, type 1, type 2. For patients with type 1 diabetes, by and large, they had their pancreas shut down, either due to an autoimmune condition or other external factors, viral, environmental, what have you. The pancreas now can't secrete insulin, which then is supposed to take sugar out of the bloodstream and put it into the cells. High blood sugar can cause a lot of issues. Now with type 2 diabetes, it's due to just poor eating habits and insulin resistance. When what happens is you secrete too much insulin because you're eating too much. These receptors become dampened. Insulin then isn't able to do its job efficiently, and then we get high blood sugar due to that. Eventually, there are patients that can have long-term effects on the pancreas and even have lower output of insulin. That's where you'll actually need insulin injected in a type 2 patient versus just type 1. Type 1 patients almost always, if not always, will need injectable insulin due to the fact that they can't secrete it themselves. Managing obesity and diabetes, insulin has been the standard for patients that truly need it. Now, when it comes to pharmacological interventions, the history is quite absurd, just due to the fact that almost all of the medications that has been used in history for management of either diabetes or weight loss have either had some banning or restriction due to the effects that they've had on the body, or B, there has been settlements and payouts that the pharmaceutical company has had to make due to mismanagement, misleading marketing, and then of course hiding information on the actual effects that it has on the body. Going through all of them, I'm not going to go through all of them in depth, but it started out they were using amphetamines in the 50s for weight loss because it had appetite suppressing properties. Now, we know methamphetamines. When you hear the word amphetamines, that's a type of amphetamine. Significant side effects obviously are addiction, can have heart issues. They were eventually banned just due to the fact of how poor the health patients were having when using amphetamines. There was also the mixture of what was called fenfluramine and phentermine, which are two medications combined, actually helped weight loss, but was withdrawn due to creating heart valve disease. And then, of course, there was a $13 billion settlement just due to the fact that they had created these issues in patients. So that was discontinued. Orlistat in 1999 was approved by the FDA. It inhibited fat absorption in the intestine, which helped to reduce body weight by about 5 to 10%, but it started to have side effects, including like GI issues. So it's not really used anymore. There was another combination with phentermine and topiramate, but again, caused birth defects, which limited use. You had lorcaserin, that was a serotonin receptor agonist, increased risk of cancer. Then you had metformin, which is still being used today, but again, I've seen enough now where if it's not as effective, patients are already being put on something else because it just isn't as effective as what they wanted it to be. But there is patients that are still plenty of patients using metformin today. It's probably one of the most common medications being used for patients with type 2 diabetes.
Okay. What's your thought process on metformin for potential prevention for type 2 diabetes?
I think because it is the most widely prescribed drug
Mhm.
for type 2 patients, it's going to be needed for patients who just aren't
Mm.
going to do the work themselves. And it is helpful. There is even some studies showing that it has anti-aging or even
Mm.
like health span increasing properties just because its ability to improve insulin sensitivity. And a lot of the longevity leaders talk so much about keeping your insulin sensitivity as high as possible. That's what's going to maintain your health span, lifespan. But again, I just think relying on a medication for that isn't the way to go. I think there is more side effects that you should take a look at versus just the, pros of it versus the risks and cons. But yeah, I think for patients that truly need it, it's probably the most used and most least harmful other than a GLP for patients with type 2 diabetes. Down the line, you got just a couple more. Avandia and Actos, both increased risks of either heart attack or bladder cancer. Both were taken off the market due to illegal marketing was one of them, and hiding cancer risk was another one. You just take a look at all of this, and all is lawsuits and major side effects for patients taking these. And so we're getting now into GLP-1s, and you take a look at the history of what's already been done. Are we going to see that now in another 15 years? Are we going to look back and say, oh, there it was again, hiding
Yeah.
side effects? And is there going to be large lawsuits being put on Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk for the creation of these GLPs? So I don't know. I really don't know. But when we take a look really in the next parts here, we're going to dive really deep into what GLPs do to the body, what they're finding in the research, and should we be worried? But yeah, I think there's a lot that you need to break down before using these medications. And then the question of how to use them is going to be very important because there are proper ways, in my opinion, to use these compounds. And I think because we're such a quick fix society, they're being used to the extreme for most patients. And I think there are maybe better ways to use them, such as microdosing or using them for shorter periods of times, not long periods of times. And there needs to be better interventions used with the GLPs, such as, of course, we'll get to that, but weight training and proper intake of calories and not using alcohol, all the things that we'll get to here in a little bit.
So, Doc, yeah, and when I hear this list, a lot of it in my mind goes down to, like you said, the symptoms, the stuff that it almost sounds like a huge profit scheme
Yeah.
from the government, from the FDA, from the pharmaceutical companies, everything top down. The humans, like our society, is just the byproduct of almost the experiments psychologically that have been done for years, decades on. Like,
Yes.
we're talking 70 plus years now at this point. Okay, so we know that's in the past. Now, moving forward, like, what can we control right now? What avenue is best for most of us? And I think that will hugely come down to some of these GLP-1s. And I guess let's just dive into what is GLP-1 and then how is it being used?
For sure. So before we get into the GLP-1 agonist kind of mechanism, the origin of the GLP-1 is interesting because when I was researching this, I didn't realize that they were able to create the first GLP-1 using Gila monster's venom.
Mm.
And I thought that was quite interesting. So scientists were actually isolating peptides from the reptile's venom and created the first GLP called exenatide. And now that was created into a drug called Byetta, which was then approved for type 2 diabetes. So that started this whole process, which I thought was super interesting. But when we have a GLP-1, so GLP-1, it's called a glucagon-like peptide 1. And what happens is after food enters the stomach, intestines secrete GLP-1 in response to any nutrient intake. And when you start to see I put it in almost like a story for patients to understand which parts of the body that it will affect due to nutrient intake. When it's released into the bloodstream, its journey starts in the pancreas. So the GLP-1 will stimulate the beta cells to increase the release of insulin. Insulin then, of course, is responsible for lowering your blood sugar, taking blood sugar. So you consume the food, sugar rises in the blood, insulin comes in and facilitates the sugar out and putting up into the uptake of that into your cells for proper use. Now, what it also does is it inhibits glucagon release. So glucagon typically increases blood sugar levels by stimulating glucose production in the liver. So that's the two kind of effects that it has in regards to the pancreas. Now, moving down into the stomach, GLP-1 slows the rate of food leaving the stomach, so gastric emptying. And this is interesting because we still need to understand what effect that has on patients. Now, a friend of mine who worked at the Mayo was actually able to see the studies being done on patients with GLP-1s. And he was getting to see patients being endoscoped after taking GLP-1s. And they were finding food was staying in stomachs for a very long time and undigested in stomachs. So we're starting to think about the effects that it might have if you cannot clear that food. Now, there are patients who are taking GLP-1s that are healthy individuals that are doing it right, and they're pooping regularly and they're taking proper care of themselves so that this works effectively. Now, there are patients who you put GLP-1s into that don't have a healthy system, you're going to see stuff like this. And we are now concerned because that can cause a slew of issues. And we're worried about causing pancreatitis, which we'll get to in a little bit. We're worried about bowel impaction and the possibility of needing to go in and surgically remove this food that's the bolus that's being stuck. So those are the things that we have to think about moving forward is now then who should we be giving GLPs to, because they're giving it to everyone. You ask for it, they're going to give it to you. If you can pay for it out of pocket, you can have it, more than likely. If they can give it to you if you're overweight or have diabetes. Now, the diabetes portion is easy. If it's the obesity, overweight problem that they had giving it to until I think in 2023, when whoever created the ability to change ICD codes, they said that you can now use GLP-1s for obesity. That was an ICD-10 you can use it for. And there you now have the first $1 trillion drug. That's why they changed it. It had nothing to do with them actually wanting to help patients.
Open the door.
It opened the door for the first $1 trillion drug.
And it's almost like a huge funnel to where the biggest part of the funnel is obesity, and then dives into diabetes, and then there's Alzheimer's at the bottom.
Yeah.
And like there's certain opportunities that you can possibly get out of that funnel, but if once you're in it, it's almost sucking you down. It's like a black hole.
And now, I saw these trends a long time ago too. I've seen these trends over many years. The lowering of markers for hypertension. I remember when 120 over 80 was normal. And now they're saying, no, it's got to be 110 over 70. And I understood why they did that. Because if a patient had 120 over 80, which we thought was perfect,
normal,
now they can give a antihypertensive med to that.
What? Yeah.
Think about that. 110 is
lowering.
Or 70 is normal. So anything over that is okay to use it as an antihypertensive. So they just were able to capture the rest of the healthy market to give because they were lowering.
And that just happened?
No, that was a long time ago. Yes, I remember. That was in Cairo school. I remember that.
Really?
I remember when they changed that. I knew the second I saw that, I knew why they did that. They were trying to capture more of the market, put more patients.
Makes sense.
Yep. Just like they're now going to be changing cholesterol level markers for entry into that. They're going to continue to do that. They're going to try and capture as much market as they can. And this is why the U.S. is going to continue to fail when it comes to their health, because they're going to start changing your mindset as far as what is healthy, what isn't, and why you need a medication for it.
Wow. Mind blown right there.
Patients over age of 65 average have 11 medications in the United States.
I could see that.
Anyway, before I get too much into that. So after the stomach, you can take a look at actually the brain and just some of the changes that you might see a GLP-1 activating. It can reduce your appetite and food intake by activating certain receptors in the hypothalamus. So it allows you to modulate your hunger, which is the drug's primary side effect, is appetite suppression.
Got to brain access there.
And why that's important is when we are eating, when we don't want to eat, we eat less, caloric intake is lower, and that's why patients are losing weight. There's no other reason. Why that's so important to know is because you can stop eating without this. It's way more difficult, more than likely because of just how strong your brain can urge you to want to eat when you don't have a healthy gut-brain axis like you talked about. And it's almost as if you are fighting an addiction, which you probably are.
Very true.
You are. It's why these medications are so helpful for patients who have such a strong urge to eat when they don't need it. They're 300 and some pounds. You don't need to eat, but it's this just, I need to eat. I have such a strong urge to eat, and they just can't fight it anymore. And it's unfortunate. So that is the drug's primary effect to helping lower weight. You have also the possible beneficial effects on heart health because it does such a great job at lowering weight. It can improve endothelial function, which obviously when you're lowering weight, you're reducing blood pressure, decreasing inflammation, all the other things that happens when you are, losing weight. And then lastly, it does have some effect on the kidneys by enhancing sodium excretion, which can improve, overall kidney health, just maintain a better fluid balance and blood pressure. So those are the main effects of your GLP-1 agonist. Now, the outcomes that they're showing, it can reduce so markers, I guess, is a better word to use on what are we seeing patients take this? What are we seeing after anywhere from 3 to 12 months of use? So hemoglobin A1C is a look at the last 3 months of your blood sugars. They're being reduced by anywhere between 1 to 1.5% within 3 to 12 months, which is awesome. Weight loss is anywhere from 5 to 15%. That's important because they've never seen these high of numbers before. All the other medications we went for prior had around 5 to 7% weight loss over the drugs or the trials. Now we're seeing anywhere from 10 to even 20% in some of these trials. So we're seeing a lot larger weight loss. But are we getting to that weight loss amount and sacrificing something? That's got to be the big question. What are we sacrificing to see that amount of weight loss? And is that amount of weight loss in such a short period of time worrisome?
Yes.
Are we losing too much lean mass, muscle in the process? Because when you lose weight, muscle's got to come with it. You can't just lose fat. You're going to lose some mass in the process. And we talk all about VO2 max and muscle mass and strength as longevity markers. You got to understand that's going to be something that you need to manage over time. Reducing major cardiovascular events such as, 13 to 26% reduction of major adverse cardiovascular events and decreasing cardiovascular mortality or death from cardiovascular events by about 12%. And lastly, worsening of renal function by approximately 30%. A lot of good. Yeah. A lot of good that's needed. Patients that really do need this, but not as a crutch. And don't use this long term. We cannot rely on this long term, just as we can't rely on medication at all for long term. But definitely showing a lot of positives. It's what are we worried about in the future that we need to take a look at.
And I think this is important to understand what are the goals that you want to set out for short term, long term. Once you reach the short term, maybe let's taper off on some of these and going down this whole pathway of, and I know you brought this up earlier on before we started too, to where, yes, once you reach that goal, is it needed long term? Is it still needed at that same rate, even though you might feel addicted that you're getting these awesome results?
Yeah.
If that is you, but I guess, what does that look like moving forward? And that's some of the questions that we're going to start answering here as the podcast kind of goes through. But
and a really scary statistic right now, and a friend of mine and I were just the one that worked at the Mayo. We're just talking about. There are some enrolled studies that are showing 100% of the study participants are gaining the full weight back that they lost after coming off the medication.
That's scary. Yeah.
And some of those patients are even gaining more after they lost it. That's what is concerning. Now, we take a look at why.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few theories to why. Well, number one, they now don't have the ability to have the appetite suppressed. And they're just going to go right back to their old habits because they weren't able to build healthy habits while taking the med because they weren't prepped by the doctor. They were told you could, and I've heard this so many times before. I remember on Josh's podcast, he said how, oh yeah, you can eat what you want now. Go ahead and do your regular life. This medication is going to take all your worries away. It's a horrible way to prep the patient. This now, I would say, gives you the ability to have some control over your urges. Now practice healthy habits. So when you are off the medication, you can use this leap that we've given you as a great way to get back into the life that you wanted when you didn't have the ability before. That's how it should be prepped. And then you should start working out regularly now that you have the ability to, now that the weight's off, you have more ability to meal prep, all the things that we've talked about how many times on this podcast. That's what needs to be done.
This is where I love a mic
Yes.
drop. Huge.
Yes. So the studies like that are really scary. Patients that are losing. And the other part would be just, I had a friend in Nebraska. He's an MD. He messaged me one time and said, Addy, I had a patient who broke into our pharmacy asking for his semaglutide order because he was so hungry and he didn't want to be off of the medication. He was like almost called him a hunger zombie. So they were so reliant on this medication. They were so hungry once they missed their dose that they were trying to break into the pharmacy to get this medication.
A new wave of zombies, man.
Dude,
That's
and
crazy.
so that rebound after coming off the med, just this influctuation of hunger is also something to be concerned about.
So true.
You have the GLP-1 that was the real foundation to creating this new wave of medication. Then they built on top of that came terzepatide, which is the dual agonist. It works on the GLP-1 receptor and the GIP, which is the gastric inhibitory polypeptide, which also helps to stimulate insulin secretion. That's its main role. Now, they're still trying to understand why, it can help balance a better effect on your blood sugars and appetite regulation. But not only that, you're having a lot less side effects than your typical just GLP-1, which would be like Ozempic, semaglutide. So the reason why it's more effective is they're theorizing it's because it works on multiple receptor sites. They're still trying to understand why patients are having a lot less side effects. So right now, Mounjaro is the most prescribed terzepatide medication. What you're finding is anywhere from 15 to 25% weight loss in some trials, and far fewer gastrointestinal side effects compared to just the GLP-1 receptor drug alone. And I have a chart here that kind of shows the breakdown between the two, and I'll have obviously it up so everybody can take a look at. They're also now creating a third agonist, triagonist, which is retatrutide, which is going to be the glucagon peptide receptor that they're going to be working on. And next, they're going to have 4, maybe 5, 6, who knows what they're going to be doing down the road. But I think when we get to a point, there's got to be a less is more mentality. You can't just keep building mega superhuman drugs for patients to just manage this. This is not the key to managing weight loss long term. It's just not.
Humans weren't necessarily made and adapted at this rate to take this external, almost synthetic drug to a certain extent.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So that's the path that it's been going down. Yes, we're seeing less side effects of this new medication. That's great. We don't know coming up with this triagonist if it's going to have less or even more side effects. But yes, we'll have better outcomes probably, but to what sacrifice?
And how's that look years down the road?
We're not gonna have that.
Yep.
So that's the really good question, is now getting into the long-term use. And I've put, I think, together 6 kind of the main questions people are asking for long-term use. And what are some of the arguments that they have, research that they have to fight these reports and worries? And the first one was just the gastrointestinal side effects that you're seeing. Number 1, when you're taking this medication, you're going to possibly have nausea. There is patients that will have vomiting, diarrhea, other types of GI issues. Long term, they're seeing gut motility issues, slowed gut motion movement. Like I said, it delays gastric emptying, so you're going to see possible gut impaction, bowel impaction, even what's called gastroparesis.
And then affects the absorption rate,
Exactly.
right, from all the
Malnutrition due to food.
aspects.
Yes. So
Mhm.
they typically, of course, come back with large cohort studies showing there isn't any long-term malnutrition that they've observed in clinical trials. Weight loss is generally beneficial for patients who are seeing that as the major
Mhm.
target of the study. Now, some of the studies I know go as long as, I want to say 4 to 7 years on some of these studies, because the first GLP was, I think, done in the early 2000s, possibly. I can't remember when exenatide was done, but it was early. But it was a different drug. Now you're getting into much more efficient drugs, and drugs that I think require better long-term studies than just the ones that we saw before. Yes, long-term, they're showing not those kinds of changes, but I just still think we're going to need more research, and we're going to have to see what this looks like on a patient who's been using this routinely for 2 years and what that looks like. So
Smart.
the second would be pancreatitis, which they state still with these large trials I'm about to get to, having really no significant increase in pancreatitis. But now we talk about all the hidden studies and the last medications that they had with the last 10, 15 years. Take it as you will. But you had what was called the Sustain 6 study, the Leader trial, the Excel study, the Elixir trial, and the Pioneer trials. These are large trials, I think anywhere from 3 to 14,000 people in these trials. And most of them showed, if not all of them showed, absolutely no significant increase in pancreatitis with GLP-1s. What I think you can take from that is, yes, a large amount, if not most patients who are taking these medications will not develop pancreatitis, but some will.
Mhm.
And that's important because we got to know how many. What is the sum? And is there a pattern in the patients who are getting pancreatitis? Are we seeing any patterns?
Very good point.
And lastly, are we actually given the correct data? Are we actually not seeing an uptick, or are we, and we're, of course, that data is being hidden?
Yes.
I don't know.
Mhm.
But I do know plenty of stories of patients who have taken it and a loved one of theirs developed pancreatitis and unfortunately either passed away or had chronic issues from it. I've heard of these stories. There are patients out there who have had it.
Yep.
So it's not like no one's getting it. Patients are getting it.
And who are funding some of these studies? It'll come down to when we say hide
There you
the
go.
results. You have to look at who is strongly funding some of these. And they'll kind of briefly alter the wording to make it may sound one way, but it may actually be a complete other until you dive into the methods. And even then there's still a little question mark.
And that's why when we're going to be ending the podcast with how should you properly use this? And I'll give you a little segment into it, but use it and get off of it. That's how I would approach this.
Boom.
Get off of this thing as soon as you can. But if you need to use it to get you a little bit ahead, absolutely. It's super, super effective. But if you don't need to use it, you shouldn't be on it.
Absolutely.
And if you need to be on it, get it the hell off of it as soon as you can. Or I'll get to that in a second. But so thirdly, thyroid C-cell tumors. So there was an uptick in medullary thyroid carcinomas in rodent studies using GLP-1 agonists, which led to a lot of concerns. And this wasn't the first time that they caught this. There was other studies, other GLP-1s that had this as well. The one study that I put in there was 145,000 patients who took GLP-1s. Wow. The other one was, I think, 290,000 patients who took DPP-4 inhibitors, which I think was just another medication that they were using for either diabetes or I think it was maybe weight loss. I have to look. But the study showed 1.33 thyroid events per 10,000 patients versus 1.46 events on DDP4, which when you take a look at that, it's not a large amount, but comparative to, there was an increase. So you take a look at the difference between absolute risk and relative risk. The relative risk, yes, there is, I believe, like a 30% chance higher that you can develop thyroid versus if you weren't taking it. Now, the absolute risk, though, is incredibly low. It's just that you do have a risk.
Yes.
You do have a risk comparative to if you weren't taking it. Now, what that looks like moving forward is if you have a history of thyroid cancer in your family, then a huge red flag before using this. That's got to be something that you talk about with your provider. You definitely need to talk about that with your provider. There is a counter argument too that the uptick in thyroid cancer finding it is that they had it already or they had nodules already, and the amount of weight that they lost were able to then palpate the nodules because of how much weight they were losing. And so that's another argument by physicians, is that the nodules were already there, the weight came off, they then found the nodules, and they had to then report that they had or developed.
Yes.
Did they develop it or did they already have it? So you have to also take a look at that variable versus in the study. So there's so many different things that you need to understand when you take a look at research versus all the variables that you need to take a look at. So by and large, yes, there is an increased risk. Yes, if you have a history of it, be cautious, be very cautious. Should you even use it? I'm not a provider who manages medication, so you need to look into that. And then, of course, we got to weigh the options, weigh the pros and the cons.
And there's a difference between some of the past episodes when we talk about stem cells, mesenchymal stem cells, and that there's like little to absolutely no adverse reactions versus something that might work really well, but even have still slight risks. And you have to be understanding of the potential possibilities of these risks occurring, regardless of how well it does for a large majority.
And you took a look at the companies that came out with the vaccination showing no risk on patients for heart issues. Absolutely no risk. We're not seeing that. And then we saw it. Young males were developing cardiomyopathy. It was a study that came out. Yes, absolutely, it happened. And is it out there? I don't know. Well, could we be seeing it? I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if it's causing an uptick in these kinds of things. Now, how long do you need to take the medication before these conditions set in? Or what's that risk? There's so much that you need to understand before you take this medication. There's so much you need to understand. So these are all things you got to think about and you got to be a little weary and cautious of. Hypoglycemia, I don't really need to hit on. Obviously, I guess that's not something I really need to jump into. The last thing that has most recently popped up was a retinal neuropathy that they were starting to see a change in. Basically, these patients were developing this rare eye neuropathy. For some reason, the cause behind it, they don't really know why. It was a very small risk of developing, but there was an uptick in patients having it. Now, again, the variables could be a lot because in patients with diabetes, we're already seeing retinal changes, retinopathy set in. So you have the patient who are already prone to having retinal changes. So is that something that occurred? Who knows? Who is at more risk versus healthy population? Those are all things you got to take into account. But yes, they were seeing an uptick in this rare retinal neuropathy. The studies that they threw out were the same large studies that show there wasn't an increase in the risk of diabetic retinopathy compared to just standard controls. But those are the major concerns when taking these medications. I wouldn't just take what they're throwing at you as the proven theories that we have. You can't prove anything. There's always going to be new data coming up. We're still very early in this process. Yes, we're maybe a year or two into probably 2 now into the larger use of this medication, but we still need to understand more. And there's always a risk with anything you do. You can't just take what they're telling you and go with it without any concern or understanding that there's not going to be a risk involved.
And doc, even when I'm thinking about this too, let's say, and walking through a typical patient when they find out and continue on the management with their medical provider and understanding what questions to ask, I think it's understandable when a person goes through and then they're recommended or prescribed, if we will, some medications. I think it's on the person and the patient to be like, okay, yes, maybe, but then to maybe do a follow-up and say, okay, if I go this path, if I start taking this, maybe I want to follow up with that myself. What does the research look like? And actually doing the due diligence before implementing this into your body, into
Yep.
your system. The patients in our society have to take ownership, because if you rely on another person's medical schooling, there's a lot of research that can come out on a yearly basis to where it takes a very top practitioner physician to stay up with some of these updated drugs. So they may be going through the motions a little bit, especially when they're seeing a lot of patients at a time. There's certain things that us as physicians, we don't realize until you actually go through it, to where, yeah, there's a lot of patients that we see, and I can only imagine the same thing with medical doctors, that it's a business. The hospitals, the clinics, they're a business. So when you are put into that situation to where you're offered or prescribed something that they find a commonality with your symptoms, okay, that might be awesome, but maybe is that right for you? Is that something that you want to follow up on and do your knowledge and
Right.
do deep dive, and then say, okay, let's make an appointment for X amount of time in the future. That way I can look through this. I feel comfortable myself.
Yep.
And then it's a team effort, not just saying, doctor told me this and now I'm mad because I get all these other side effects. Maybe they talked to me about that for a few seconds, and then I totally forgot when I'm overwhelmed with, what is this? How do you even say this name
Right.
of this medication? Like the mental mind frame, we should take a step back and have a general understanding. I know a lot of clinics, they give you a piece of paper on what this drug is, what the side effects are, but without them actually discussing that. And what patients, there might be a select few that actually read through it and see the side effects, but they balk at the side effects. There has to be way more education, I feel like, from all standpoints, the patient, the physician. Like, we have to take ownership on our health. This is our body. We have to respect that. Obviously, respect the physicians coming forward, but that has to be a whole conversation itself. But doc, now, let's dive into these compounds and how to properly manage and use them. And I know you said if you don't need it, get off it. And
Yes.
I know you have a few stories, just clinical experience from that standpoint, but I guess what do the complementing strategies look like, and where are we at with using some of these compounds?
So in one trial that I found, they reported a loss of approximately 6 pounds of lean body mass alongside significant fat loss. So 6 pounds of muscle, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot of muscle.
Shoot.
Yeah. And so we do know when we're losing weight, you're not just losing fat. Everything's coming off.
Yep.
And so why that's so important is, we've talked about this before, our muscle is such an important organ system. You need as much of it as you can. The later on in life we get and we don't have it, it's only going to cause more issues. So you need to increase it. As the more younger you are right now, you need to start thinking about putting on as much muscle as you can, so that when it comes to a point in your lifetime where it's not as easy to put on muscle, it's not going to be as much of a struggle. And then obviously, as we get older, we talked about all the markers that start to decrease in life, such as testosterone and IGF and growth hormone and all these things, which just doesn't give us the ability to keep that mass on. We're ramping up to coast later on in life. Now, if we lose such large amounts of that before we even get to that point, we're really setting yourself up. It's going to be a struggle. The number one thing that I think all providers should be recommending with a patient with a GLP is resistance training. You need to lift weights. You absolutely need to lift weights. Now, there could be There's so many different studies out there that show how much weight you need to lift.
Mm.
I would even just at a minimum put at least 2 to 3 weekly sessions, focusing on obviously all the major muscle groups. And studies that actually show resistance training combined with GLP-1 receptor agonists lead to a better glycemic control and improved body composition compared to medication alone. Because again, we know just what exercise does to the body when we're trying to improve metabolism anyway.
Absolutely. And taking the question, going back to losing 6 pounds of body mass and exactly what Dr. Addy said of that long-term effect, very huge factor for most people, if they trip, fall, if they don't have the ability to catch themselves with quick twitches, that is a broken hip, that is a blood clot, that is death. That is happening to so many people. Not only that, but also just the ability to function, move, and its effects on all the other body systems. There's a reason why we are saying this, and it's so important.
Mhm.
So let's obviously resistance training, huge important factor with GLP-1s. What other factors are we noticing that we should include also into these strategies?
The other main primary push I think providers should be talking about is adequate protein intake. Number one, people are already worried about, they're hoping they're going to lose weight on this medication. That's going to be crucial. So their first thought is, I don't want to eat as much because I know that's going to help me lose weight. You got to still be able to intake proper protein. Otherwise, the mass of the muscle is going to come off. We're still talking muscle. So you got to get adequate protein intake. I would say no less than 100 grams a day which I've still even said, even if you're off of a GLP, you should be taking in about 100 grams minimum, woman or man, adult woman or man. We've heard anywhere from 0.8 to 1.6 grams of protein per kg of body weight. So there's so many recommendations across the board. If you want to go 1-to-1, I think that's always a good one too.
If anything, get more than less.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any concern other than you're eating 300 grams of protein a day, which I don't think many are doing, but more is better than less, like you said. Got to get high quality protein sources so that obviously you can maintain as much muscle mass as possible while you're losing weight and losing it. Some of it's going to come off, but how much can you maintain while it comes off?
Very true.
So those are my big pushes for sure when it comes to complementary strategies. The other ones that I have in here is obviously maintaining a balanced diet rich in vegetables, healthy fats, just maintain great hydration, all the things that we've talked about. But I think the one that most aren't talking about, which is very helpful, is you got to have a timeline. Doctors are putting patients on these medications and just saying, go have fun. Let's see what we can do with it. See how much weight we can lose. Let's see how much we can manage.
It's hard to manage.
Let's see what a year or two looks like. I don't know, maybe. And by God, that's such a poor way to manage patients anyway. And this isn't the first time. Cholesterol medications, antihypertensive medications, anti-anxiety medications. It's set in stone. It's use it until you don't need it, but you'll probably always need it. So I'm not going to take you off of it. Patients that are on omeprazole, antacids for 10 years without any real intervention. It's mind-numbing and it's unfortunate. So you got to have a timeline. So most studies are showing that you need to be on it for at least 3 months to see that 15 to 20% weight loss if you really need it. But a lot of patients don't need that. If you really aren't, some patients, they want to lose that much weight, which that's also got to be a question your provider needs to talk with you, which is what's a healthy amount of weight you should get to? If the patient feels they should be losing 50 pounds, but as a provider, like you're good with 20, it's unhealthy to lose 50 for you. Like there's got to be a conversation. You need to have that. I recommend patients who, even with just peptides, should be on it for 2 months on, 2 months off. Okay. That's a cycle that you'll see a lot of more holistic providers recommending. With patients on these medications, maybe you'll stick to that 3rd month with what the studies are showing, 3 months to see those results, and then you're off of it. And I think studies show that 50% of patients are off of it by the 3rd month. So we are, just because I don't know if they just don't want to take it anymore due to the side effects. I'm not sure what that trend is looking like. But the ones that stay on it and can stay on it for a year or more, we got to worry about those long-term side effects. It's understanding that you need a timeline, talk to your provider about that, and then understanding what that looks like. Again, the duration of use, I've already hit on that. How much you should be dosing is another question. They usually start you off lower dose and then they ramp you up, which is a good idea. Some will put you on the largest dose right away. I would question that. I would start with a lower dose always and then move up. So just, again, something to think about.
Doc, how's it being administered? Is it more through pills? Is it through IV
So
subjects?
it's a subcutaneous injection.
Okay.
That's where all of them are, the medications are being done.
Okay.
There are some compounding pharmacies that are putting out oral semaglutide now. I don't know its effectiveness. I got to look into the studies for that.
Okay.
I'm guessing that might be shut down soon. Eli Lilly already put out a warning to compounding pharmacies saying stop making semaglutide, terzepatide, which is hilarious just because, again, you got to understand why they're wanting that. So they argue that there's not a consistent creation of this product and it's not regulated properly, and you might get a bigger dose than a smaller dose. And yeah, some studies show that, but it's because they want more money. That's really what it is. Let's call a spade here. I think lastly, what I put in here was just evidence and recommendation, which is adjust treatment plans based on individual responses and any side effects experienced. A regular evaluation should be done as you obviously go through the use of this medication. That is how you should properly use a GLP-1. As we continue to experiment, we might see better uses. But right now, this has got to be in your brain before you step foot onto this use of this medication.
So, Doc, going into some of the newer literature with
Retatrutide. There we go.
and even with some like the GLP-1s, how does this look like for developments of how they are working and what's coming down the line for some of these other weight loss properties?
I believe retatrutide is in phase 2 clinical trials, if I'm not mistaken, but retatrutide was developed by Eli Lilly, and it's the first triagonist medication for the treatment of obesity, type 2 diabetes. And it combines these multiple peptide analogs. So we talked about GIP or GLP-1s, we talked about GIP, and then the third receptor that they're trying to hit is glucagon. So in studies, they're showing already significant weight loss compared to control. And what we probably will see is even more weight loss being done, these studies. Again, if you're going to be hitting more receptors, you're going to have more efficiency, more than likely. I don't know if we're seeing more or less side effects. I know there are still side effects, similar side effects, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain are all common in these trials, but we're still going to need more research to figure out just what to expect when taking this. But I would expect this medication to be out within the next year or two. And then, of course, comes the question, serious side effects, what's going to be an increased risk? Same old. It's not like they're going to finally take the bad out of medication and only have good. It's always going to be medication. There's always going to be a burden on the liver. There's always going to be an increased risk of developing issues. There's no beautiful 100% drug about to be created. We'll never get that. And it's sad to say, but we're never going to get that. There's not going to be that. Yes, they're always going to be developing the new up and coming. There's always going to be the shinier new object. Instead, what should you focus on? How to build healthier habits, how to increase and improve your mindset when it comes to managing your weight long term. And that's going to be the bulletproof method.
Absolutely.
And that's all I got. That's it. Plain and simple. Sorry, that's how this podcast ends, but that is where you need to step foot and start to change yourself. Are there plenty of enhancers out there to help you? Yes. Does it come with a risk? Yes. Do we still know the perfect way to use them? No. But are there supplements and things you can use aside from medication to help you? Yes. Akkermansia is a probiotic that can kind of mimic similar effects of this medication, one you can look into. Berberine can improve insulin sensitivity. There's so many things out there that you can get into before wanting to get into this GLP with probably less risks. So where to go from here would be, you need to start looking into the research yourself. You need to come with questions for your physician. You got to have questions for your physician, and you got to take what we've talked about today, and you need to have a plan when you're on this so that you can really mitigate the long-term effects. Even just thinking that there is going to be some, knowing that you might have more of those risks coming the longer you're on this. So get off of it as soon as possible. You got to weight train. You got to maintain proper protein intake. Take care of yourself while doing this. And it is a beautiful medication. I think it is helping a lot of patients. We're reducing long-term comorbidities, mortality rates, but cardiovascular events. But I'm torn. I'm torn on it. I really am. And I just hope that we can instead create a community of individuals who use these types of enhancers in a more holistic and appropriate manner. And I think you're going to see a lot less harmful side effects being done that way. That's what I would state.
Well stated. The things that work well for humans long term is the basics. It's exercise, it's nutrition, it's sleep, you got to have the fundamentals. If you don't have the fundamentals, if you add in any of these other medications, these other supplements, what have you with that, they'll have effects, but they're not going to have this big of effect if you don't have the foundation.
Yep.
And that's where, even if you go and get this prescribed by another like medical doctor or physician, maybe supplement an internal medicine doc, maybe supplement someone else who looks at you from more of a holistic standpoint as a whole body, and incorporate some of these things into it. So then you can, I know time is limited for most people, okay? So add to your team of physicians, add to your team of knowledge for the benefit of you moving forward long term.
Absolutely.
So yeah, no, Doc, this was a wealth of knowledge, and I know we could go down some rabbit holes on a bunch of these small areas, but I think our audience understands the risks involved and gives others in our society and our community a different outlook on when potentially utilizing this. What are some of the ways that they can go about it so they can sleep better at night? I think that's important. So if you have anyone that's listening has any family members that are either on these drugs or obese or undergoing weight loss or have diabetes, there's solutions, but knowing the risks and asking, like Doc said, the questions. It's the best we can do for our body and for our community moving forward. So
beautiful.
As we go into other episodes coming down the road, please, by all means, we're going to do down the road a natural weight loss episode and breaking down some of the natural ways that you can help lose weight outside of some drugs and peptides, even though they work really well for certain individuals. And so stay tuned to that. There's going to be way more to come, but like we said previously, leave comments, subscribe, share, moving forward. So Doc, any other closing remarks that you have?
I don't. I appreciate everyone listening. I know this is going to be a topic. It still is a hot topic and will continue to be a hot topic moving forward. So I hope everybody can use this how they see fit. And please share this with anyone that you feel needs this information, which I think by now you got to know at least one person on this medication. It's getting to be that popular. With that, just know that there's always risks with everything, and just be cautious moving forward. Other than that, thank you guys. Continue to like, subscribe. We appreciate each and every one of you. And until next time, Doc. Woo! See you guys later.
Disclaimer: the content provided in this health podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast is solely at your own risk. The creators and hosts of this podcast are not responsible for any actions or decisions you may take based on the information presented.
Thanks for joining us on The Functional Code. For more evidence-based health insights, subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, Your journey to a healthier you begins with understanding the functional code. Until next time, stay well, stay informed, and embrace the science of living well.